Welcome back to our life, beginnings and always. Okay, road trip. Even though you were awake, the sun had barely peeked its head above the horizon, and the sky above was still dark. Though lightning by the minute, usually you wouldn't be up so early, especially during summer vacation, but today was different. Today, instead of the lazy days you were used to, everything around you was a flurry of activity, as both your family and Cove prepared for what lay ahead. Because parked in the street just outside your house was a massive RV camper, so big you couldn't even see Cove's house behind it. His parents had rented the RV for a few days to take him on a short road trip to see the Redwood National Park. You glanced at Cove, who was standing nearby, taking in the scene in front of him. The prospect of the trip had to be a mixed bag for him, but it was only 3 days, so it seemed he was dealing with it as best he could, especially now that you and your family were joining them. You weren't sure how exactly it had happened. You knew your parents and Coves spoke to each other so often, and somewhere along the way, plans were made after Cliff offered to share the space. The parents all thought it was a fantastic idea. You had already gotten a good look inside while helping to load everything in, and you had to admit that while it was a really big car, fitting that many people inside was going to be snug.
Let's go.
Move it or lose it, kiddo. Mom bustled past with a cooler in one hand and a large bottle of water under the other. She was upbeat for this early in the morning. Ma, however, seemed to be on the other side of the wavelength. She followed behind her wife, dragging her feet on every step. I'm going to need a whole jug of coffee once we hit the road. You could relate to Ma. It was way too early. Personally, you were as raring to go as your mom. You felt like you were a middle ground between the two. You felt evil, or like you were a middle ground between the two. You just tried to keep up and took in some deep breaths. The air was still a little damp from dew, but you didn't mind it. And then at the end of the chain came your sister. She had a bone to pick before the trip officially started. Her rattling off critiques added some level of normalcy to everything new going on. I don't get why I can't sleep in the bed tonight. Jamie is the youngest, and I'll never fall asleep in that loft. We're trying to make things fair on everyone. If you want to play the older card, you should be offering to take the loft both nights. It's important for big siblings to make sacrifices for their younger ones. Elizabeth huffed, not happy with that answer in the slightest, and folded her arms, leaning back against the side of the RV. The trip plans had been nailed down prior, the sleeping arrangements included. Elizabeth still held on to her objections with them. There was a main area of the RV with a couch, loft, and some floor space. At the end of the car was a room with a large bed. Your moms were sharing the bed. Kira was on the couch, and father and son intended to sleep on the floor. The adults determined you and Elizabeth would switch between the small loft above the driver's seat and sharing the bed with moms. You were fine with the arrangements. You were excited to sleep in a loft. You felt sharing a bed with your parents was going to be awkward. You were looking forward to a sleepover with your moms. You weren't too happy either, but didn't want to make a fuss. You thought it was unfair that Cove had to sleep on the floor. You were fine with the arrangements. As long as you had a place to rest your head and some description, it didn't bother you. Alright, you lot. Does everyone have everything they need? We're heading out in 5 minutes. Now's the time to double check. You don't want to forget something important. At the word, Elizabeth yelped and dashed back into the house, her bedhead hair bouncing behind her as she went. Ma came over and gave you a smile, setting her hands on her hips. How about you, Jamie? Do you have all your clothes packed? Toiletries, deodorant, floss, anything else you can think of? You were confident you had it all. You weren't sure about that. Oh, you had to run back inside for something. You just gave her a flat look. Oh, you had to run back inside for something. Sprinting up the stairs to the bathroom, you grabbed your toothbrush from beside the sink before heading back down. You were glad you were reminded to grab it after having left it out to use this morning. It would have been embarrassing if you couldn't brush your teeth for the next few days. Your mom was still there, waiting with a knowing expression as you walked out again. Got everything now, Jamie? Yeah. With a few minutes left to spare before leaving, you mentally went over what you had packed for the trip. Clothes, a pillow, a blanket, usual day-to-day gear for most people. You also had more personal things such as your portable gaming console, your pencils and paper, your favorite stuffed animal. Without fail, it always made you feel more comfortable whenever you went out somewhere new. It was like taking a little piece of home away with you. A couple of things to read, a bag of makeup. You kind of dreaded the idea of trying to apply it nicely while in a cramped RV, but it was something you wanted to keep on hand. Your camera, it was just a little pocket camera you had gotten from your mom's, but you couldn't miss the opportunity to take some neat snaps. Your MP3 player and headphones. With so much time going to be spent driving in a car, you wanted to make sure you'd be able to have some music to put on. Pencils and paper, you had to be prepared in case you saw something to sketch the part, or if you had to write anything down, or if you needed to pass time just doodling. A portable gaming console. Drive to the Redwood National Park would take an entire day one way, so you wanted to make sure you had a way to entertain yourself while traveling there and back. Couple of things to read. You had packed one of your old favorites and a new one you'd never tried before. You knew you'd have plenty of time for them both on such a long drive. And that was everything. Hey, let me take that for you, Jamie. I'll stow it in the RV. There's a few spots left. It'll fit. You let Kira take your bag and gave her a grateful smile. With nothing left to do, you watched the others getting ready for the trip. Kira and Cliff seemed to have the most energy of anyone. They were finishing packing the suitcases away, while your moms had gone to lock up the house. They high-fived whenever another one got crammed into the storage compartments of the vehicle. Even though your own apartments were more low-key than Cove's, you could tell they were both excited for the trip. It had been a while since your family had been away anywhere together. Elizabeth skipped towards the RV, a bag slung over her shoulder, and you were surprised to see she seemed more optimistic about the whole ordeal now. Usually she wasn't one to exit the confines of her room unless it was for TV or food, or to leave her family behind to be with friends. You would have thought 3 whole days packed in an RV with 6 others would be too much for her, but it was a nice surprise. You supposed any vacation was better than no vacation in her mind. Cove had been pretty quiet so far, and more than anything seemed to be overwhelmed by the situation. You were excited for the trip too. You weren't very excited for the trip either. You were eager to get to the destination. You were curious about the RV. You didn't feel much either way about the plans. You were excited for the trip too. It was great to get away and explore new places. Soon the miscellaneous remaining tasks had all been wrapped up. Everyone piled into the RV. It was officially time for the trip to start, and it did. Cliff took the first shift driving. He cautiously navigated the massive car out of the narrow neighborhood streets. It was touch and go for the first part of the journey. Your moms and Kira were all huddled at the front, trying to get a view of how much space they had on each side. There was a sense of relief when the first long leg of the trip was hit, and the RV would only need to go down one stretch of highway for miles. The mom group cleared out of the driver's area, leaving Cove's dad to it, taking more comfortable seats around the main cabin. You felt like you could finally relax now too. Time slipped by as morning faded away. Before you realized it, the engine of the RV came to a stop, but only halted for a few moments as Cliff climbed out from the driver's seat and Mom took over. Mom was sitting shotgun, giving Mom a quick tutorial on the controls, as it was her first time driving anything this large. Cliff groaned as he headed towards the rest of you, stretching his arms above his head and loosening up his muscles. We're making good progress. Yeah, maybe you should take a nap in the back for a while. That was a long haul you just did, and I know you're on less sleep than usual. Cliff waved a hand, that trademark grin of his slipping into place. I don't need sleep. I've still got a few miles in the old tank. He flexed an arm, showing off his muscles to drive the point about how resilient he was home. And Kira rolled her eyes in amusement. Dad, everybody has to sleep. Cove groaned at the tough guy act, though Cliff simply chuckled and ruffled his son's hair.
So?
Are you going to be driving again anytime soon, Mr. Holden? I want to know so I can prepare. Should anyone pack some rope? I might need it. There's no seatbelts up here. Elizabeth called down from where she was lounging in the loft above the driving compartment. She was laying on her back, her hair falling over the sides, swinging around as the RV started up again, took off down the road. A bag of potato chips was balanced on Elizabeth's stomach, and she tossed a couple in her mouth right as Cliff held a hand to his chest, pretending to be offended by the remark. Kira laughed lightheartedly. Lucky for all of us, we have enough adults to cover the shifts today. He won't be driving again until tomorrow. You stayed quiet. You shook your head at the ribbing. Phew, that's a relief. Just enough time to write up my last will and testament. We shouldn't gang up on the poor guy. It's not his driving I'm worried about. You shook your head at the ribbing. We shouldn't gang up on the poor guy. Thank you. At least someone here is on my side. Mom then shouted back in her seat to join in the conversation, a playful smile tilting her lips. What I'm more worried about is this old monster getting us there and back again before falling apart. It looks as though it was built in the early 90s. It must be older than some of the occupants. That's just the aesthetic of the decor. It's not that old, I think. Did you ask what year the model was before you rented it? Kira wrinkled her nose in thought.
Hey.
Yes, I did. I just can't remember what the answer was. Cliff chuckled at her, while the rest of you let out a collective sigh. The RV lurched a little as it picked up speed, and you held on to the ladder to the loft to keep your balance. You felt something graze the top of your head before a weight tilted on your black hair. When you tilted your chin up carefully to look, you heard the rustling of the bag of chips and realized Elizabeth had rested the end of it on your head. She gestured to the opening, silently offering to share her snack. You took a handful. Reaching up, you scooped up some chips. After that, the weight of the packet left your scalp. You happily munched away as the conversation continued on and you got closer and closer to your destination. The day flew by with the group of you chatting, playing games and passing the time together before finally arriving at the park and setting up for the night. Ma was closing the windows while everyone got ready for bed, saying goodnight to the others as she made her way to the back room. You had all had dinner together while still driving, and some hours after had arrived at your destination and found a spot to park in for the rest of your stay. Giving a look across the front of the RV, you noticed almost everyone there was already dozing off where they were, with Cove having completely fallen asleep curled up in the passenger seat. He must have done so while Kira was driving the last leg, and they had decided not to disturb him. Kira herself was the only one up there who was still awake, flipping through a magazine next to a portable light from her spot on the couch. It seemed Mr. Holden needed to sleep despite his claims. You followed your moms into the back room and closed the door behind you before crawling onto the bed between them. It was a queen-size bed, so there was enough space for the three of you together without too much squishing. Get a good rest, Jamie. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the bushwalk in the morning. It's been a long time since I was out in nature like this. There will be plenty for us to see. You stayed awake for a little while longer while your moms whispered about the park and forest in general. With the sound of their voices in the background, eventually you nodded off to sleep. The next morning you were up, bright and early, preparing for the day ahead. You had slept well. You had an okay sleep. You had slept terribly. You had slept well. You fell asleep before you knew it and had woken up rested. Ma whined a bit about the firmness of the mattress, but Mom had only encouraged her to enjoy the trip while she could. While looking for a spot to get ready, you had some trouble finding a space of your own as the others were doing the same thing. Cove was perched on top of the counter, brushing his hair and tucking up his legs every time someone wanted to move past. The parents were checking, double checking, and triple checking that you had everything, to the point where you had stopped listening to them altogether. You knew you wouldn't be returning to the RV at all that day, but by the look at the backpacks, they were packed up and ready to go. You doubted anything was missing from them. It didn't take much longer until you all exited the RV in a bustle and headed into the Redwood National Park. Wow. Cove had his head tilted up towards the canopy of trees, his eyes wide as he took in the massive trunks on either side of you. You knew that the redwood trees here were considered the tallest trees on Earth, but you weren't prepared for exactly how huge they would be in person.
Come on!
Smile, you two! You spun just in time for Kira to snap a picture of you and Cove together before she pointed her camera at Cliff, trying to get a shot despite his weak protests that she should just enjoy the moment. Your parents were walking behind the group a little, with Mom telling Ma some information she had read about the park in a brochure. Ma listened happily while looking around and taking in the sights, every now and then asking a question or making a joke about something Mom had said. You smiled at them, thinking your mom must have read a lot of pamphlets to know so much about the park. Maybe you should come and work here as a tour guide if you know so much about this place. Elizabeth teased, earning a squeeze on the nose from your mom. She seemed to be enjoying herself, but you thought that might just be because she was amused by everyone else's reactions. You were in awe of the redwood trees. You were fascinated by the sensations surrounding you. You were in a good mood. You weren't as impressed as the others. You were embarrassed that the adults were being so touristy. You were fascinated by the sensations around you. You were in awe of the redwood trees. Surrounding you on either side, the enormous trees shot up into the sky, the sunlight peeking through their canopy and speckling the path in front of you. The sheer size of the redwoods made you feel like a tiny ant bustling along through the forest. The adults had decided on some casual nature walks rather than any serious hiking, and you strolled along at your own pace, taking in the scenery. Elizabeth sped up a little, smirking at Cove as she fell into place between the two of you, and immediately you could tell by her expression she was going to say something taunting. I can't believe our families are actually on vacation together. She threw her arms out, speaking with a genuine sense of bewilderment. I would have joked about something like this happening, but now I'm not sure I want to give them any more ideas. Cove ignored her completely and continued walking along. Just watch. Next year, they'll be talking about their next new amazing idea. She put on a fake voice, deeper than her own. We should just sell both our houses and move in together. Think of how much we'd save on the mortgage. It was clear that Elizabeth was being sarcastic. Cove simply shook his head, not really bothered by her. You supposed he was used to it by this point. But seriously, they really do act like we're a single family, just because we live across the street from each other. Elizabeth gave you and Cove a look, her eyes glinting with mischief as she leered at you.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we'll all be related, legally anyway. She said it as though she was a gossipy old lady. But she almost immediately dropped the tone and nonchalantly said her real thoughts. At least that's what Ma thinks. Cove still blushed, which made Elizabeth smile triumphantly, as though that was her whole purpose for teasing him. Then he mumbled quietly, refusing to make eye contact with either of you. I don't know why you think you're so funny when no one else does. You told her to cut it out already. Cove has a point. It wasn't a great comment. I'll marry you, Cove. You ignored Elizabeth. You were embarrassed. You told her to cut it out. You don't need to ruin the day with that. Oh, I thought you would be happy someone put the idea in Cove's head. I don't think he's making plans about marrying anyone right now. Elizabeth made a smug face, saying in a sing-song voice, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Cove frowned and reddened harder, but pretended to ignore what she was saying. The day continued on, with plenty to see and experience. You passed a few different activities that you would have liked to try out if you had the time, such as kayaking and rock climbing, but Ma said that would have to wait for another trip. There was a little stream during the walk that you sat beside and sat out a picnic for lunch, nibbling on a selection of fruit, sandwiches, and chips. Various birds flew by overhead, and you made a game out of guessing the species that were hanging out in the trees nearby. You even managed to get a couple of them right, including the kingfisher that grabbed half a Cliff sandwich. You were glad you got to do this in the end. You were disappointed to only have one day in the park. You thought the long trip wasn't worth only one day here. You had more fun hanging out in the RV. You hadn't had a good time with this trip. You were glad you got to do this in the end. It was definitely a special experience, and one you'd remember for a long time to come. Smile to yourself, committing the sights and sounds to memory. Your group made it back to the camp just as the sun was setting in the sky and the stars were appearing one by one. Everyone had enjoyed different parts of it most. You traded stories of what you thought while you were eating dinner. Then afterwards you pitched in to help clean up. You, along with Elizabeth and Cove, got to head back to the RV early and spend some time together while the parents stayed outside longer. It was nice to have the space to yourselves after the cramped journey there, and while Elizabeth had locked herself in the back room with her headphones, you and Cove were left in the main lounge area. You headed up to the loft to relax on your own. You hung out with Cove. We might as well get comfortable. Who knows how long they'll be out for. You took a seat on the sofa while Cove sat down on the other end, tapping his fingers against his knees. Your cheeks warmed a little at that. Being close to him never failed to feel exciting. You'd seen Cove nearly every day for the past 5 years, but seeing him in a jacket was still somewhat unusual. In Southern California, he could get away with that. It was a simple difference from his normal style, yet you couldn't help noticing the way he looked right now. It looked great on him. In fact, Cove always looked nice. When Cove cleared his throat, your eyes snapped to his. He had an eyebrow raised and had clearly caught you staring at him.
What?
Is everything okay? You averted your gaze from him entirely. Yeah, you don't worry about it. That looks nice on you. Yeah, everything is really good. You nodded while saying nothing. That looks nice on you. Cove immediately blushed at the unexpected compliment. What? He didn't say anything more than that one-word question. You decided to elaborate further. You know, I hardly ever see you wearing a jacket, especially in summer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like wearing as few layers as possible. It's easier that way. I'd rather be cold than extra hot. And it's kind of a pain to carry extra clothes around. My parents made me bring this jacket. I'm the same way. I don't mind either. I love wearing layers. I'm the same way. They're bulky and heavy, and they usually make me feel too warm. Cove smiled lightly at you and nodded. I've noticed. You perked up hearing that. He noticed you too. You asked him what he liked to see others wear. Hey, what kind of things do you think are nice to see on another person? Cove's eyes widened at the question, and his defensive reply seemed to slip out before he'd had the chance to have a proper think about it. Nothing. You laughed out loud, and Cove gave you a dry look. Come on, that's not what I meant. You composed yourself and sat up straighter, all traces of laughter disappearing from your face. Answer with what you do mean then. Isn't there anything at all you think looks good when you see it on someone? Cove mumbled under his breath, and you couldn't quite catch the words. He was having a difficult time with the subject. It was a topic that made him uncomfortable, so you let it go. You had a little fun, and that was enough. You changed the subject. You're not very good at these conversations, are you? I swear I won't make fun of you. Not really it. Cove seemed pretty grumpy about your statement, but you weren't ready to give up so easily. Please. Cove sighed and looked down at his lap where he was fidgeting with his hands, still reluctant to give an answer.
I don't know.
I don't know. You made an unimpressed sound over how this was going. Are you sure? Fine, I guess. I kind of like ankle bracelets. Ankle bracelets. Yeah, everyone can wear a pretty bracelet. Wrist ones are cool too, but they're pretty normal. There's something fun or flirty about ankle bracelets.
I mean...
It's more special or something. I don't know how to explain it. Cove brushed his knuckles against his cheek awkwardly, seemingly unsure where to go from here. Thanks for answering. Cove smiled at you, happy to hear he wasn't the only one who felt that way. When he said nothing else, you took a moment to gather your own thoughts. You had to get an anklet on ASAP. Maybe you wear your anklets more now. Maybe you wouldn't wear... Maybe you'd wear your anklets more now. Maybe you wouldn't wear your anklets so often. Maybe you'd wear your anklets more now. You had to get an anklet on ASAP. You needed to see how Cove would react to that. Cove looked away again, feeling awkward about this. You gave him an understanding look, and usually he would start to smile like normal again, but not this time. His expression only stiffened more. You were surprised to see him like this, as he always bounced back pretty quickly after being flustered. Cove? Still, he wouldn't look at you, and now even his breathing was growing tense. It began to click. He was trying to build himself up enough to say something hard for him. You waited for it silently. Till finally, he peeked your way through the corner of his eyes. You were fully attentive by this point for whatever he was going to mention next. People having green eyes. That's also something I like. Huh? For a moment, you were stunned and at a complete loss for words. That was definitely not where you imagined this was going. Cove faced you head on, his expression full of desperate meaning. You got the distinct impression he hadn't chosen that just because he liked the color green. He chose it entirely because it was your eye color. Was he trying to flirt with you? That was all you could think. Your legs felt like jelly, and you wondered if you might fall right off the couch. What do you like for another person, Jamie? Cove looked away thoughtfully, and you couldn't quite tell what was going through his mind. You look especially good in them. Cove blushed a deeper shade of red, and his mouth fell open, acknowledging that you had specified him straight out. Now you were both flirting with each other. He placed his hands in his lap and looked down. It seemed he hadn't expected to get this far and didn't know where to go from there. With that, the topic abruptly dropped off. Cove officially had no more to say on it. The parents all arrived soon after, each of them climbing into the RV and finding some place to sit down and rest their legs. Elizabeth, having heard the commotion, came out from the room for the first time since arriving and joined you all. You spent the evening chatting and playing a few games, enjoying the last evening of the trip together. Bedtime arrived within the blink of an eye. As the group hunkered down for the night, your mom did a final round to be sure nothing had been left behind. She explained that Cliff was going to start driving early in the morning like on the first day, but would be letting everyone else in the group sleep. There wouldn't be a need for all of them to get up. Now was the time to check. You hadn't left anything outside. You, as well as everyone else, were confident you had it all packed up inside the RV, which meant it was time to get some rest before the journey home tomorrow. Your moms and Elizabeth said goodnight, heading to the back room while you climbed up to the loft. Cove and his family got situated below in the previously set arrangement. You tried to get comfortable as a million thoughts were running through your mind. It was hard to believe the trip was practically over, and before you knew it, you'd be back in your own bed at home. You enjoyed this mini adventure. You thought the trip had been okay. You felt the trip was a waste of time. You hadn't had a good time. You enjoyed this mini adventure. It was short, that was for sure. But you got to see and do so much during your time here. All in all, it was a nice break away from home. The minutes ticked by silently. It didn't take long for the soft snores of Cliff and Kira to drift up to you. They were asleep now. You wondered if Cove was still awake and decided to poke your head out from the loft to find out. You blinked through the dark. Looking down the hall, you noticed Cove laying on his back, his eyes staring straight up at the ceiling. His seafoam hair was spread out on his sleeping bag. He must have felt you watching him, because suddenly his eyes locked on yours. It was difficult to see much in the dim light, but you could make out the crooked smile on his face well enough. You grinned back at him. You made a silly face. You waved at him. You grinned back at him. Cove shrugged in his bed while still smiling, or at least you thought he did. You then gestured for him to come over. You then went back to trying to sleep. You then decided to have fun quietly. You then gestured for him to come over. Cove looked unsure about it, but you were happy to see him slowly start to sit up anyway. His sleeping bag rustled as he moved, though he tried to go slow and froze up like a deer in headlights every time he made a sound, watching his parents for any sign of movement. Eventually he managed to maneuver around his sleeping dad, and make it to the ladder, standing on the bottom rung, where he looked up at you and whispered, "What?" Oh, it was nothing. Good night. How are you doing? You invited him up to the loft. Should I? Do you want to come up? His eyes widened just so you could only tell because he had come to where you were. Cove glanced behind him quickly at his sleeping parents before turning back to you. Okay. You broke out into a grin and scooched back as far as you could, making space for Cove to crawl in. He was very tall, so it wasn't a great fit for him, but he managed to squeeze himself in. Luckily, you were short enough to leave him with some room. Aww. So what am I doing here? I thought we could hang out. You can sleep here instead of the floor. Cove raised an eyebrow, not having expected you to bring that up now. I'm not sure about this. Cove swallowed loudly. You noticed he wouldn't look you in the eyes anymore. You're feeling the nervousness too. You felt comfortable being so close to him. His reaction made you happy. You felt comfortable being so close to him. It seemed natural to have him near you, and being close like this only made it better. You thought back to earlier in the evening when you and Cove had been talking alone on the sofa. He had definitely been flirting then, and now you were here. You laid there silently. You tried to ease things in conversation. You nudged closer to him. You touched his free arm lightly. You tried to ease things with conversation. You laid your fingers on Cove's arms, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath him. Cove's face flushed dark enough to notice even in the almost pitch black RV cabin. The hand resting in front of him tightened, falling into a fist. You okay?
Yeah.
I'm fine. I mean, I'm not dying or anything. Cove's eyebrows bent up nervously, but his smile widened. He curled himself deeper into the loft and closer to you. He looked away as he did it. There was almost no space left between he and you. Cove's breath tickled the side of your face. For a moment you stayed together like that. Neither of you spoke a word. When your eyes locked again, Cove seemed almost taken aback by the situation, as though it hadn't completely hit him what it was going to feel like to do this until just now. He opened his mouth to say something, but shut it tight before anything came out. You went to sleep how you were. You moved back. You snuggled against him. You leaned in to kiss him. Oof. Should I? You went to sleep how you were. I'm gonna save. And if this goes horribly wrong, you leaned in to kiss him. You moved in even closer, eyes half closed as your lips inched towards his, so slowly. Cove froze immediately. You could feel his body trembling against you as you neared. You grew close enough to be one motion away from placing your lips together. Then all at once he bolted upright, completely forgetting the restrictions of the location, and smacked his head against the roof of the RV with a loud crack, making you gasp aloud. Ow! Cove, are you okay? Cove didn't answer. He fell back to the loft floor in a flustered pile. He pressed one hand against his head and the other over his face as he groaned in pain. The sound of movements in the RV below startled you, and when you looked over the side, you noticed Cliff had similarly shot up, looking around wildly. Oh no, 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 no. You snuggled against him. You closed the distance completely and nuzzled your face into his chest. You could hear his heart beating rapidly. Cove stiffened up and let out a yelp, which he quickly bit down on his lip to stifle. He gave you an apologetic look. This still wasn't bad for him, just surprising. After a few more moments, he settled in, his breath deep and steady. He rested his chin against the top of your head. You could peek up and see him smiling, and it made you happier to know he was enjoying the moment too. The two of you fell asleep before long, cuddled up together. When you woke up the next morning, it was to the rumble of the RV as it traveled the long journey home. You noticed quickly that you weren't as warm as you had been during the night, and when you checked next to you, Cove was gone. Blinking sleepily, you peeked over the edge of the loft to find out where he had gone. Maybe he had snuck back to his spot on the floor during the night. However, you soon noticed him sitting on the couch, talking quietly with his mom, his head hung in embarrassment. Your movement gave you away, and Kira suddenly looked up and caught your eye. She simply smiled amusedly at you, and it was obvious what happened. Cove hadn't gotten away with it. They found him there in the loft, and then you woke up while he was trying to explain. You knew it was gonna be a long, long time before you lived this one down, if you ever did. Soon your moms and Elizabeth emerged from their room, dressed and ready for the day of travel. You spent most of the day hanging out together in the RV, savoring the last few hours of vacation. Kira suggested a few different travel games she used to play with Cove when he was younger, and you all had a great time competing against each other. A little later in the day, you tried to talk to Cove about what happened in the loft, but he simply apologized and changed the subject. It was a bit too much for him to try speaking on, especially right now. You understood. When the RV finally pulled onto your street, it was well into the night, and you were looking forward to crawling into your own bed after the last few days away. Everyone else must have been feeling the same, because it was mutually agreed that unpacking and cleaning the RV would wait until morning. Once home again, you went straight up to your room and dropped onto your bed, shoes and all. You were happy to be in your own bed. It felt weird to be alone. It felt good to be alone. You wished you were still on the trip. You missed being near Cove. The two of you had basically been living together for 3 days. It was nice. But you knew that it wouldn't be the last time the two of you would spend time together, and that thought comforted you. With those last few thoughts drifting through your mind, it wasn't long before you dozed off to sleep. Tomorrow, life would go on like normal. I'm going to save there. And that'll be all, folks. We cuddled with Cove. That was so adorable. I mean, him freaking out wasn't adorable, but I was glad I was able to go back and fix that.